Arizona Territory, 1875. The desert no longer frightened Jack Turner. After 40 years of gun smoke, cattle drives, and buried friends, very little still could. He was a retired cowboy now, living alone on a dry stretch of land where the wind howled louder than men ever dared. His hands were rough, his beard gray, and his revolver mostly untouched, hung on a nail beside the door like a memory he refused to throw away. Jack had not planned to become a hero. Heroes usually died young in the West. He had survived by minding his own business. That changed the day he rode into the town of Red Mesa. The saloon was loud with laughter and whiskey, but Jack's ears caught a different sound, men talking low, proud, and careless. Indian traders. Slavers, really, though they used cleaner words. They bragged about 2 Apache girls captured during a border raid, waiting to be sold south by the end of the week. Jack froze mid-step. He had seen this before, too many times. Young faces traded like cattle, broken lives hidden behind coins and contracts. Years ago, he would have shrugged and walked on. That was the rule of survival in the Wild West. Look away. But Jack Turner was tired of surviving. He sat alone at the bar, staring into his untouched drink. The faces of his dead wife and unborn child, lost decades earlier to a ranch fire, rose uninvited in his mind. He had failed to protect them. That guilt had followed him across deserts and years. Maybe this was his last chance to do something right. The next morning, Jack rode back to his ranch and opened a small iron box buried beneath the floorboards. Inside were gold coins, old winnings, and the deed to his land, the only thing of value he had left. He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his coat. By sunset, he was riding toward the traders' camp, every mile heavier than the last. Jack knew what people would think. An old cowboy buying Apache girls. In the West, intentions didn't matter, only appearances did. The camp sat near a dry riverbed, guarded by men with rifles and cruel smiles. When Jack dismounted, the traders sized him up, amused. "You're late, old man," one of them said. "Girls don't come cheap." Jack didn't argue. He handed over the gold and the deed without bargaining. When they brought the girls out, Jack felt something twist in his chest. They were young, far too young for what the world had already done to them. One stood tall despite bruises, her dark eyes burning with defiance. The other clutched her arm, wary but observant, reading every movement like a tracker reads sand. They did not look at Jack with hope. They looked at him like he was just another monster. Jack signed the papers with a steady hand. The traders laughed, already counting their profit. As he turned to leave, Jack spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "This ain't ownership," he said. "It's a debt I owe to the past." No one listened. But the desert did. Night fell fast in the Arizona desert, pulling long shadows across the traders' camp. Jack Turner said nothing as he mounted his horse, the reins heavy in his hands. Behind him, the 2 Apache girls were forced onto a mule, their wrists free but their fear tightly bound. To them, freedom was just another lie men told before the pain began. Jack felt their eyes on his back as they rode away. He didn't blame them. The desert stretched wide and silent, broken only by the sound of hooves and wind. After an hour, Jack slowed his horse and led them off the main trail. The older girl, tall, sharp-eyed, noticed immediately. Her posture stiffened, ready to run or fight. Jack stopped near a cluster of rocks and dismounted. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands away from his gun. "You don't belong to me," he said calmly. "Never did." The girls exchanged a glance, confusion cutting through their fear. The younger one frowned, studying his face for signs of deception. In the West, words were cheap. Men proved truth with action. Jack pulled out the folded papers, the sale contract, and held it over a small campfire he had just lit. Without hesitation, he dropped it into the flames. The fire ate the ink first, then the signatures until nothing remained but ash. "You're free," he said. For a long moment, neither girl moved. The older one stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Why?" Jack exhaled slowly. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does the right thing." Freedom didn't feel real to them. Not yet. They had been tricked before. Promises were weapons in this land. They made camp that night, separated by distance and silence. Jack slept with his back to them, his gun untouched. He wanted them to see that he trusted them first. At dawn, the younger girl tried to run. She was fast, bare feet barely touching the ground, but the desert had no mercy. Jack caught up without grabbing her, simply riding alongside until she collapsed from exhaustion. He dismounted and offered his canteen. She hesitated, then drank. That was the first crack in the wall. They spoke little as they traveled. Jack learned their names in fragments. The older one was Ayana, Eternal Blossom. The younger was Nita, bare, small but fierce. They had lost their family in a raid and had survived by learning when to fight and when to endure. By the third day, traders' tracks appeared behind them. Jack knew then that this was no longer just about freedom. It was about survival. They took shelter in an abandoned ranch, its roof half-collapsed, its walls scarred by old bullet holes. As Jack secured the doors, Ayana picked up a discarded rifle with practiced ease. "You taught soldiers once," she said quietly, not asking. Jack met her gaze. "I taught myself how not to die." That night, as the wind screamed through broken boards, something shifted. The girls no longer looked at Jack like a captor. They looked at him like a man standing between them and the world. And in the Wild West, that was the most dangerous place to stand. The abandoned ranch stood like a skeleton against the desert sky. Its wooden walls creaked with every gust of wind, and the silence inside felt heavier than gunfire. Jack Turner checked the doors twice, then the windows, moving with the habits of a man who had survived too many ambushes to believe in luck. Gianna watched him closely. She noticed how he never turned his back on the open doorway, how his hand hovered near his revolver but never rested on it. He wasn't afraid, but he was ready. That distinction mattered in the Wild West. Nita sat near the fireplace, sharpening a small blade she had hidden in her clothing since the traders' camp. Jack noticed it immediately. He said nothing. Trust, he knew, could not be demanded. It had to be allowed to grow. By morning, the tracks were clearer. Horses, 3 of them, traders, or worse, bounty men hired to reclaim property. Jack studied the ground while Ayana stood beside him, her eyes reading the sand as well as his ever had. "They are close," she said. Jack nodded, "Too close." He made a decision then. "If they catch up," he said quietly, "you run east toward the hills." Gianna shook her head. "We don't leave people behind." Jack met her gaze. "You will if you want to live." For the first time, she saw anger flicker across his calm expression, not at them, but at the world that kept forcing such choices. The traders reached the ranch by noon. Jack fired first, not to kill but to warn. The shot echoed across the open land, sharp and final. 2 men stopped. The third kept riding. That one didn't make it. When the dust settled, one trader lay wounded, another gone, and the third fleeing. Jack stood breathing hard, blood seeping from a shallow cut on his arm. Gianna tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it without being asked. "You bleed like everyone else," she said. Jack smiled faintly. "I always have." That moment changed everything. They buried the wounded man's gun far from the ranch and moved again before sunset. There would be more coming. There always were. As they traveled, Jack taught them, not as a master but as a man sharing survival, how to read clouds for storms, how to walk without leaving clear tracks, how to use fear without letting it use you. In return, Ayana taught Jack Apache signs, desert plants that healed, and how to listen to silence. Nita showed him how to set traps so subtle even coyotes missed them. They were no longer escort and rescued. They were a unit. One night around a low fire, Nita asked softly, "Why did you really do this?" Jack stared into the flames for a long time. "Because once, no one came for my family," he said, "and I promised myself I wouldn't be that man again." The fire crackled, the desert listened. Iana looked at Jack differently now, not as a savior, not as an owner, but as something far more dangerous in the West. A man with nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. By the fifth day, the desert no longer felt like an enemy. They had traveled far from Red Mesa, deep into a stretch of land where patrols were rare and the horizon stretched endlessly. The sun still burned and the nights still froze, but something had changed. The fear that once walked beside them had begun to fall behind. They found shelter in a narrow canyon where cottonwood trees clung stubbornly to a thin stream. It wasn't marked on any map, but Ayana said her people once used it as a resting place during long journeys. Jack trusted her judgment without question. They decided to stay for a few days. Rest was no longer a luxury, it was survival. Jack repaired a crude linta while Nita gathered edible roots and berries. Iana cleaned their weapons and stitched torn clothing with practiced hands. No one gave orders. Each person simply did what needed to be done, as if they had lived this way for years. At night, they sat by the fire and spoke more than they ever had. Jack told them about cattle drives through Texas, about nights sleeping under stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. He spoke of his wife, Mary, and the child they never met. His voice stayed steady, but Ayana noticed how his hands clenched when he finished. "You loved her," she said. Jack nodded, "Still do." Ayana shared her own story, how Apache girls were taught strength before softness, how survival was not cruelty but necessity. Nita listened quietly, leaning against Ayana's shoulder, her sharp eyes never fully resting. The canyon began to feel like something Jack had not known in decades. Home. But the Wild West never allowed peace to last. On the third morning, Jack spotted smoke on the horizon. Not traders this time, soldiers. U.S. cavalry. Their blue coats were unmistakable even from a distance. Jack's jaw tightened. If the soldiers found them together, explanations wouldn't matter. To the law, Ayana and Nita were still Indian captives, and Jack was a criminal who had interfered with commerce. The girls could be taken, Jack could be jailed, or worse. He gathered them quickly. "They can't see us together," he said. "If they do, they'll take you." Nita's fists clenched. "We run again." Jack shook his head. "Running only proves guilt." Ayana studied his face. "Then what?" Jack hesitated. This was the decision he had been avoiding. "We change the story." He explained his plan, dangerous, imperfect, but the only one that offered protection. If they reached a nearby town and presented themselves not as captives, but as family, the law would hesitate. Paper mattered to white men. Appearances mattered even more. Gianna understood immediately what he meant. Marriage. The word hung in the air like gun smoke. "You would do this," she asked quietly, "for us?" Jack met her eyes. "I don't make promises lightly." Nita looked between them, realizing the weight of what was being offered. This wasn't ownership. It wasn't rescue. It was a bond that would mark them all as outsiders. The soldiers passed without seeing them, their dust fatting into the distance. Relief came, but so did clarity. They could never go back to the way things were. As the fire burned low that night, Ayana sat beside Jack, closer than before. Not touching, but no longer distant. The canyon echoed with silence, and in that silence a future began to take shape, fragile, dangerous, and real. In the Wild West, love was not gentle. It was an act of defiance. They left the canyon before dawn. The air was cold, heavy with the kind of stillness that warned of trouble ahead. Jack rode point, scanning the land the way a man scans the barrel of a loaded gun, carefully, without blinking. Yana followed close behind him, Nita bringing up the rear, watching their tracks vanish into the dust. None of them spoke much. The word marriage had changed everything. By midday, the outlines of a small frontier town appeared in the distance. Wooden buildings, a water tower, and the faint movement of people going about their lives, unaware of the storm walking toward them. To Jack, towns were more dangerous than deserts. Out there, threats announced themselves. In towns, danger smiled and asked questions. They stopped a mile out. "This is as far as we decide," Jack said. "Once we ride in together, there's no undoing it." Yana dismounted and faced him. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of generations. "In my people's way, marriage is not protection. It is responsibility." Jack nodded. "Same in mine, just different words." Nita crossed her arms. "And if they hate us?" Jack didn't lie. "Some will." That was enough truth for all of them. They rode into town as one. Heads turned immediately. Conversation slowed. A retired white cowboy riding with two Apache women was not a sight people ignored. A few men watched with open suspicion. A woman pulled her child closer as they passed. Jack felt it all and kept his back straight. At the general store, the owner refused to sell them supplies. At the saloon, laughter died the moment they stepped inside. Whispers followed them like dust. Then the sheriff arrived. He was tall, clean-shaven, with tired eyes that had seen too much violence to enjoy it. He studied Jack, then the women. "These your captives?" he asked bluntly. Jack stepped forward. "My family." The word landed hard. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" Yana lifted her chin. "I am here by choice." Silence. The sheriff looked from her to Jack. "You know the law doesn't look kindly on this." Jack met his stare. "The law also looks kindly on paperwork." That night, under the dim light of a small church, they stood before a preacher who was more nervous than judgmental. No music, no guests, just signatures, spoken vows, and the weight of history pressing in from every wall. Jack's voice didn't shake when he promised protection and respect. Yana's didn't either when she promised loyalty and truth. Nita stood beside them, her hand resting on both their shoulders. Not property, not witness, but bond. When it was done, the preacher whispered, "May God help you." Jack thought the desert might be more reliable than God, but he nodded anyway. Outside, the town felt colder. Now they weren't just different. They were defiant. That night, as they rode away, torches flickered behind them. Someone fired a shot into the air, not to hit but to warn. Jack didn't look back. He had crossed his last line. In the Wild West, survival was hard. But choosing who you stood with, that was harder and worth everything. Marriage did not bring safety. It brought attention. By the second night after leaving town, Jack knew they were being followed. The desert had taught him to read signs others missed. Disturbed stones, broken brush, tracks too careful to belong to animals. Someone wanted them found. Or punished. They rode hard, avoiding main trails, sleeping in short shifts. Nita took first watch every night, her eyes sharp even in darkness. Yana stayed close to Jack now, not out of fear but out of resolve. Whatever this path led to, she had chosen it. On the fourth morning, they found proof. A burned Apache symbol carved into a rock near their camp, not from her tribe. This was the mark of hired hunters, men who tracked Indians for money and reputation. Jack's jaw tightened. They won't stop. Yana nodded. Neither will we. They reached Jack's old ranch by sunset, a weather-beaten house standing alone against the open land. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. Jack set traps, blocked windows, and loaded his rifle with calm precision. This wasn't a fight he wanted. It was one he would finish. The hunters arrived before dawn. 3 men experienced, confident. Jack waited until they crossed the dry creek bed, then sprung the traps. 1 horse went down screaming. Another man fell hard, leg broken. The 3rd fired blindly into the dark. Iana moved like shadow, striking fast and vanishing again. Nita covered Jack's flank, reloading without being told. They fought not as strangers, but as people who trusted each other with their lives. When it ended, 1 hunter was dead, 2 fleeing. The silence afterward was heavy. Jack leaned against the porch, blood dripping from his knuckles. Iana cleaned the wound gently, her touch steady. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. Jack looked out over the land. So could the world. That morning neighbors arrived not to help but to stare. Word spread fast in the West. A white man living with Apache women, violence on his land. Rumors grew teeth. Some said Jack had been cursed. Others said he'd betrayed his kind. By evening, a warning was nailed to his door. "Leave or burn." Jack tore it down without comment. That night, as firelight danced across the walls, Nita spoke the question they had all been avoiding. Will this ever end? Jack didn't answer right away. Then honestly, no. Iana reached for his hand. Then we endure. Jack realized something then. This wasn't protection anymore. It was partnership. They began planning a new life beyond the ranch, somewhere hidden, somewhere free. Not because they were weak, but because survival sometimes meant choosing distance over pride. Before dawn, Jack took his revolver off the wall. Not to use it recklessly, but to carry it again with purpose. The Wild West had made its choice. Now it was their turn. They left the ranch before sunrise, not in fear but with intent. Jack Turner locked the door of the house he had built with his own hands, knowing he would never return. Some places were meant to be remembered, not revisited. The land behind them had given him solitude. The road ahead demanded courage. They traveled north, into harsher terrain, rocky hills and narrow passes where hunters avoided riding and soldiers rarely patrolled. Iana guided them using old Apache routes passed down through stories, paths invisible to outsiders. Nita scouted ahead, her confidence growing with every mile. They no longer moved like fugitives. They moved like a family, protecting its future. Food ran low. Water became precious. One night, a sudden storm trapped them in a ravine, rain turning dust into mud, thunder cracking the sky open. Jack shielded the fire while Iana held Nita close, whispering Apache prayers older than the land itself. Jack listened. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. In that moment, he realized the West had never truly belonged to one people. It belonged to those willing to endure it together. Days later, they reached a high plateau overlooking a hidden valley. There was water, game trails, natural cover, a place forgotten by maps and men. "This is where we stop," Iana said. Jack felt something settle in his chest, not relief, belonging. They built slowly, carefully, a cabin of stone and timber, traps set wide, smoke hidden low. Nita learned to ride patrol, Iana learned to shoot with Jack's old rifle, and Jack learned when to stay silent and listen. They were not hiding anymore. They were establishing ground. Weeks passed, then months. Word of them spread, not as rumor but as legend. Travelers spoke of a place where no slave was held, where no one was bought or sold. Some said Jack Turner had gone mad. Others said he had found redemption. A wounded Apache man arrived one evening, guided by signs only Iana could read. Then a family fleeing violence. Then another. Jack hesitated only once. "We can't save everyone," he said. Iana placed her hand over his. "No, but we can stand." The valley became a quiet refuge, not a town, not a tribe, but something in between. No flags, no ownership, just people bound by choice. One night, sitting beneath a sky crowded with stars, Nita asked, "What are we now?" Jack smiled, lines deep and honest. "We're proof. Proof that the Wild West did not only belong to guns and greed. Proof that a man could buy freedom and never own a soul. Proof that family could be forged, not by blood or law alone, but by shared risk and respect." As the fire burned low, Ayanna leaned against Jack's shoulder, not as property, not as protection. As a partner. The West would never forgive them, but it would remember them. And sometimes that was enough. Years passed quietly in the hidden valley. The Wild West changed beyond its ridgelines. Railroads cut through old cattle trails. Towns grew where saloons once stood alone. Soldiers came less often and traders vanished like bad memories swallowed by sand. But the valley remained untouched, protected not by walls or guns alone, but by reputation. People spoke of it in hushed voices. A place where no man owned another. A place guarded by an old cowboy and 2 Apache women. A place the desert itself seemed to defend. Jack Turner grew older, slower, but never weaker in spirit. His hair turned fully white, his hands stiff in the cold mornings. Yet every dawn he still walked the valley's edge, checking traps, watching the horizon, not out of fear, but habit born of love. Ayanna became the heart of the valley. She settled disputes, taught children Apache ways and English words, reminded everyone that strength did not require cruelty. Nita grew into a fierce protector, riding patrol farther than anyone, her laughter rare but real. They were no longer hiding. They were living. One winter, Jack fell ill. The desert nights were too cold for old lungs, and no amount of stubbornness could change that. He lay inside the cabin, fire crackling low, Ayanna at his side, Nita standing watch at the door like she always had. Jack knew his time. "I didn't plan to stay this long," he said softly. Ayanna smiled through tears. "The best stories never do." He asked to be taken outside. They wrapped him in blankets and carried him beneath the open sky. Stars stretched endlessly above, same stars he had slept under as a young cowboy, before loss hardened him, before guilt followed him like a shadow. Jack took Ayanna's hand, then Nita's. "I didn't save you," he said. "You saved me." When the sun rose, Jack Turner did not. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the valley facing west. No cross, no marker, just stones and silence. The desert wind passed over him gently as if recognizing one of its own. Life went on. Children grew, families came and left. Stories spread farther than tracks ever could. Some said Jack Turner had died rich. Others said he died poor. Both were wrong. He died complete. Years later, travelers still spoke of the legend, of the retired cowboy who bought Apache girls to free them and found a family instead, of a place where the Wild West paused long enough to remember its humanity. The valley never bore Jack's name. It didn't need to. Every act of kindness there carried his legacy forward. And when the desert wind whispered at night, those who listened closely swore they could hear it say, "Freedom is not bought. It is chosen."